They came without warning, not through the front door, but through a loophole. That was the opening line on CNN at 3:47 a.m. when the first grainy footage leaked. Camo-clad tactical units, answering not to the state but to Washington, disembarking from armored trucks beneath the hazy streetlights of South Central Los Angeles. There was no call from the governor's office, no declaration of emergency, no explanation, just boots on asphalt and silence from the top. Inside the California state capitol, Governor Gavin Newsom stood frozen, phone pressed to his ear. A voice from the Defense Department, tight and cold, confirmed what he already suspected. "They have landed," Newsom said, his jaw clenched. "They've been operational for 4 hours," came the reply. 4 hours. By the time Californians even heard the rumor, the machinery had already been grinding. When Newsom hung up, he didn't reach for coffee. He reached for the Constitution. 1:14 a.m., secure line. Attorney General Rob Bonta picked up on the second ring. "Gavin, this isn't a deployment," Bonta said. "No," Newsom replied. "It's a breach." "A breach of what?" "Our laws, our rights, our damn statehood." Still no official statement, no press briefing, no White House podium. But there was a tweet. There was always a tweet. Always a tweet. This time from Kash Patel. "California can't even keep the lights on, let alone control its streets. If Newsom can't do his job, I will." The retweets spread like wildfire, and just like that, the chaos had a hashtag. Hashtag Marshall State on the ground. The justification seeped in like military fog. A carefully worded press release from Patel's inner circle claimed escalating unrest in LA, national security indicators, and a limited duration federal action. But the document named no single act of violence, no casualties, no police request, no coordination with state leadership. "Sounds like a coup wrapped in camouflage," Bonta muttered as he read it. 2:22 a.m. Newsom issued a classified emergency directive to the Attorney General's office. One line, hand-scribbled in red: "No man bypasses the 10th Amendment, not while I'm breathing." Meanwhile, the right-wing media machine revved into full gear. Tucker Carlson called it heroic. Footage of last year's burning trash bins looped like a soundtrack to fear. They weren't responding to events, they were constructing them. And Patel? He wasn't watching the narrative. He was scripting it. In a now-deleted post on his private network, he wrote, "These people think they're states. They forget they're just pieces on the board." Bonta's legal team didn't waste a breath. Statutes were pulled, precedents dusted off, a draft injunction drafted at record speed. The mission: stop the federalization of California's National Guard, stop what Newsom now called an undeclared invasion. 3:05 a.m., Sacramento. A young aide turned to Bonta. "Sir, are we filing an ex parte?" "Yes," Bonta answered without pause. "Let them complain about process. We'll argue legality later. Right now, they're breaking the damn glass." 4:17 a.m. Tension breached state borders. Rachel Maddow opened her broadcast with a chilling line. "If a man can send troops into a state without its consent, then federalism is just window dressing on dictatorship." 5:33 a.m. San Francisco Federal Courthouse. A notification pinged through the system. Case filed, State of California versus Kash Patel. Presiding judge, Denzel Washington. A name that needed no introduction. Not to the legal world, not to the country, and certainly not to Kash Patel. He had built his power through backrooms and back channels, but now he would face a man who didn't blink under pressure. A judge who answered to the law, not to the moment. Just months earlier, he had warned in an op-ed, "The erosion of judicial independence doesn't begin with executions. It begins with compliance." Now Denzel Washington, seated as the presiding judge of the U.S. District Court in San Francisco, would be asked to make a ruling that could ignite a legal civil war. His clerk reviewed the filing, a 22-page emergency complaint seeking to halt the unauthorized deployment of federal forces. The complaint cited direct violations of the 10th Amendment and the Administrative Procedure Act. One sentence leapt from the page: "No armed force may override the sovereignty of a U.S. state in the absence of insurrection or invitation." Neither is present, but Judge Washington didn't sign. Not yet, because 5 minutes later, Kash Patel's legal team filed a counter, a delay tactic, a procedural wedge, a calculated stall. They asked for 24 hours to respond, and Washington granted added, not because he approved, but because he was methodical, because he knew that a rushed ruling would be shredded on appeal, because he wasn't playing checkers. He was playing constitutional chess. 6:12 a.m. First light spilled over Sacramento. Newsom stood by the Capitol window, the orange dawn burning behind him. "They're going to say we overreacted," he muttered. Bonta answered without looking up. "Good. That means we reacted." 2:03 a.m., hours earlier, California Attorney General's office. "Draft the TTRO," Bonta ordered. "We're not waiting for federal courtesy." An aide blinked. "Ex parte?" "As ex parte as hell." The legal war room came to life. Statutes lit up on screens. Case law rolled like coordinates on a battlefield map. The mission was crystal clear. Stop Kash Patel from weaponizing the military against the state. By 11 o'clock a.m., the full 22-page complaint hit the federal docket. The charges were precise and damning. Violation of the 10th Amendment. The Patel-led federal government had trampled California's sovereignty. Breach of the Administrative Procedure Act. Patel's Department of Defense had acted without proper legal channels, oversight, or public process. A textbook case of executive overreach, a generalissimo in bureaucrats' clothing. Bonta's signature stood bold beneath the text. Let the record show, no American state has surrendered its right to self-governance at the barrel of a federal gun. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., inside a high-ceilinged legal suite lit by morning sun and television glare, Patel's legal team fired back. Not with clarity, but with chaos. A sharply dressed lawyer appeared on Fox News. "The president has inherent authority under 10 U.S.C. 800-2406 to respond to insurrections. California's inaction forced his hand." The clip ran on repeat. Pundits nodded like dashboard bobbleheads. "If Newsom can't secure his own cities," one commentator insisted, "then the federal government not only can act, it must." No proof, no precedent, just volume. Back in California, the line was drawn. "This isn't just about boots on the ground," Bonta said. "It's about precedent. If we lose this, Texas is next, then New York, then whichever state refuses to kiss the ring." His deputy muttered dryly, "So we're not filing a lawsuit. We're building a firewall." Then came the twist. The name assigned to the case made heads turn. Judge Denzel Washington, 83 years old, appointed by Clinton, stoic, respected, unshaken by headlines, but always mindful of the Constitution. Inside the courthouse, whispers filled the halls. Isn't he the same judge who warned about judicial surrender last spring? Yeah, the one Patel tried to sideline. Destiny, it seemed, had a sense of irony. 11:27 a.m., San Francisco Federal Courthouse. Judge Washington read the filing slowly, thoroughly, carefully. Then he sighed. "Ex parte," he murmured, as if tasting something bitter. The word lingered, like the smell of overcooked politics. He tapped his pen. "Courts generally hate ex parte," he said quietly to his clerk. "They prefer full briefings, full sunlight." He turned the page, read again, and paused. But it's not every day that a man like Kash Patel storms a U.S. state. Across the country, his legal team filed their formal response. A request, a stall, a procedural trap dressed up like respect. They asked for 24 hours to submit a full brief. No fire, no fury, just paper. But Judge Denzel Washington saw through it immediately. It wasn't a defense. It was a delay, disguised as due process. Still, he granted it, not out of deference, out of discipline. Governor Newsom received the update like a general reading weather on the battlefield. "They asked for time or surrender," he said quietly. "Then we make damn good use of ours." 12:40 p.m., MSNBC broadcast. A commentator read aloud from the court filings. Plaintiff Gavin Newsom, on behalf of the state of California, filed an ex parte motion for a temporary restraining order at 11 a.m. on June 10th. Then came the line that raised the nation's blood pressure. Defendants Kash Patel and the Department of Defense requested 24 hours to respond. Judge Denzel Washington granted the request. The camera cut back to the anchor. Looks like this judge wants a full fight, not a fast one. Inside a crowded Berkeley cafe, a law student looked up from his laptop. This is Bush v. Gore, but with boots. 1:32 p.m. Legal forums erupted across the internet. Some praised Washington for honoring legal structure. Others accused him of buying Patel more time to militarize the state. But in the middle of the debate, one op-ed from a retired judge cut through the noise. Emergency orders should be rare, but when troops are already on your streets, delay is injustice. It's surrender. 4:46 p.m., California State Capitol. Bonta's legal team huddled around a whiteboard scarred with notes and constitutional citations. We need to hammer the 10th Amendment, one advisor urged. Another added, in the Administrative Procedure Act, their process was a joke. No review, no record, no accountability. Bonta nodded. Bury them in logic, he said. If they're going to use the military as a megaphone, we'll use the Constitution as a sledgehammer. 8:01 p.m., White House briefing room. A reporter raised his voice. Mr. Patel, California claims you've overstepped federal authority. Do you have a comment? Patel stepped forward, smiling tightly. They said I couldn't take control of Homeland Security. I did. They said I couldn't override local chaos. I did. Now they say I can't keep America safe. Watch me. Thunderous applause followed from his base. Smirks from the press corps front row. 11:59 p.m., Bonta signed the rebuttal brief, placed it on his desk. This goes in at 9 sharp. He glanced out the window. Patrol cars hummed in the distance. Helicopters drew wide circles over the city skyline. The troops were still out there, but so was the law. Across town, the courthouse readied itself. A time had been set. 1:30 p.m., the country had a clock, and Judge Washington had a decision. The board was laid out like chess. Tomorrow they play. June 12th, 1:26 p.m., San Francisco Federal Courthouse. Outside courtroom 6B, the hall was a press crush. Journalists with hot mics, clerks whispering case law like sacred scripture, and one overconfident pundit live streaming from the stairwell like he was reporting on a moon landing. Inside the chamber, the air was taut, like a stretched wire. No cameras allowed. Every seat taken. The stakes, not just federal overreach. This was about the limits of power, the durability of the Constitution, and whether America remembered the lines it wasn't supposed to cross. Then, right on time, Judge Denzel Washington entered. He didn't smile. He didn't blink. He just said, "This court is now in session. Matter, State of California versus Kash Patel et al. Let's proceed." Kash Patel's lead counsel stood tall, well-pressed, radiating entitlement. "Your Honor," he began, "Mr. Patel acted within his constitutional authority under Title 10, Section 10406. When a state fails to suppress insurrection or cannot protect its citizens, the federal government has not just the right, but the duty to act." Judge Denzel Washington raised an eyebrow. "Insurrection?" he asked evenly. "Has one been declared?" The lawyer didn't blink. "No formal declaration, sir, but the facts on the ground, burned vehicles, attacks on property, they constitute insurrection by implication." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Somewhere near the back, someone scoffed, loud enough to cut the air. Rob Bonta stood slowly, calm, composed, razor sharp. "Your Honor, we've seen no insurrection, no formal request for help, no escalation beyond what local law enforcement can manage. What we have seen is unilateral federal action." He looked directly at the judge. "That's not protection. That's occupation." Patel's attorney leaned forward. "If California's sovereignty becomes an excuse to harbor lawlessness, then federal power must act." Bonta didn't flinch. "We don't harbor lawlessness. We defend constitutional lines, the ones that keep this country from becoming a monarchy." Judge Washington leaned forward, fingers steepled. "I don't care whether you call it rebellion or resistance. What I want to know is, who decides that? You, Mr. Patel, or the Constitution? Silence fell, a silence that tasted like metal. Patel's side tried a new angle. The federal government cannot sit idle while a state collapses. Bonta replied instantly, voice cold and clean. California is standing. What's collapsing is the balance of power. When one man moves troops like chess pieces. A junior associate tried again. Your Honor, the Administrative Procedure Act doesn't apply in emergencies. Bonta stepped in before Judge Washington could respond. Then declare one. Declare a national emergency. Trigger the War Powers Framework. But don't bypass the system and pretend the Constitution is optional. Judge Washington nodded slightly. That's a fair distinction. 2:07 p.m. Recess. The courtroom buzzed like a disturbed hive. Reporters dashed out texts. MSNBC aired a montage of past military deployments. OAN slapped up a chyron. Patel defends America. California cries wolf. In the hallway, a muted TV showed a clip from an old interview. Stephen Washington, retired Supreme Court Justice, sitting with calm weight. The judiciary must stand, if not for justice, then at least for the memory of what justice used to mean. Inside the courtroom, Judge Denzel Washington sat motionless. He'd heard the quote before, but today, it meant something heavier. 2:21 p.m. Back in session, Judge Washington tapped the bench. I've reviewed the filings, listened to the arguments, and studied the statutes. This court recognizes the gravity of federalism. It also recognizes abuse of discretion when it sees one. Patel's counsel stood, preparing to object. Judge Washington cut him off. Sit down, counselor. You'll get your appeal. The gallery held its breath. The court finds that the deployment of federal troops into California was done without statutory authority, absent any meaningful coordination, and lacking sufficient factual justification. He paused. It constitutes executive overreach, and that overreach stops here. Gasps, a ripple of restrained applause. A reporter near the back mouthed, "Holy shit!" Bonta turned to his team. No fist pumps, just a breath, just relief that the law still meant something. Judge Washington continued, the temporary restraining order is granted. Further deployment of federal forces is hereby restrained. Any ongoing presence must cease unless renewed through a coordinated and lawful framework. Then came the final line, quiet but thunderous. This court does not answer to chaos, it answers to law. When Judge Denzel Washington returned to the bench, he brought with him the gravity of precedent and the weight of a constitution too often treated like a brochure. The courtroom stood in silence. Not the ceremonial kind, but the kind where everyone knows they are inches from history. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and without raising his voice, he dropped his words like a gavel across the room. This court does not serve the president. It serves the Constitution. A cough broke the air, nothing more. The use of troops, without cause, without consultation, without an evidence, violates the very essence of the 10th Amendment. He let the words settle like dust on marble. Let me be clear. A president may act in a national emergency, but he may not manufacture one. Patel's attorney stood abruptly, face pinched. Your Honor, if I may... Judge Washington didn't blink. No, you may not. Sit down. This court finds, he continued, that the deployment of federal forces into the state of California was executed without statutory foundation, absent factual justification, and in direct conflict with the procedural standards of the Administrative Procedure Act. It was not national defense. It was executive overreach. He paused. Let that land. Therefore, this court issues a temporary restraining order, effective immediately. No further deployment of federal forces into California shall take place without explicit coordination and legal validation. All currently deployed units must stand down and withdraw unless reauthorized through proper federal-state channels. At the plaintiff's table, Bonta exhaled. Not relief, just confirmation that reality had not fractured. A clerk leaned toward the reporter and whispered, "He actually said it." Judge Washington wasn't finished. This court directs the Department of Justice to issue immediate notification to all relevant federal agencies regarding the scope and binding authority of this order. And let the record reflect, if this breach is tolerated, there may not be many state boundaries left to defend. The courtroom didn't erupt. It exhaled. Patel's team scrambled. One aide passed a phone across the table. Another typed furiously into a laptop. Their lead counsel stood. "We respectfully file immediate notice of appeal to the Ninth Circuit." Judge Washington nodded once. "You're welcome to it. The law welcomes scrutiny." Outside the courthouse, the headlines had already broken. Washington blocks Patel troop order, judicial earthquake in California. San Francisco to Patel, "Get your boots off our lawn." 10 minutes later, Kash Patel emerged onto the north lawn of the White House. A slapdash press setup. American flags, some hastily ironed, framed his shoulders. Judges don't win wars, presidents do. He stared into the cameras, chin lifted in defiance. But the thunder was missing from his voice. This was a weak decision. A political stunt by a Clinton appointee. It won't last. Reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Patel, will you comply with the order?" He gave a half smile. "I don't lose, I just recalibrate." Back in California, Bonta stood at a makeshift podium. No confetti, no victory speech, just clarity. Today's ruling wasn't just about troops, it was about boundaries, legal ones, constitutional ones, human ones. When a president forgets those lines, the courts must remind him. He turned to his team. "We didn't beat a president, we restored a line." Inside the courtroom, Judge Washington remained a while longer. He watched the chamber empty, noticed the blank notepad on his bench, the gavel resting. Still, heavy, and before rising, he said to no one in particular, "Law isn't loud, it just lasts. It just lasts." By nightfall, the courthouse in San Francisco stood quiet, but the digital world didn't. Hashtags blazed through timelines like wildfires across dry California brush. On Nash, Washington verdict, Patel troops, #justice draws. Line CNN ran a bold chyron. "Justice draws a line, we will not go back." MSNBC went harder. One man tried to militarize a democracy. One judge made sure it stayed one. Fox News pushed back, a political ruling masquerading as constitutional law. Outside, cameras still filmed the empty steps of the courthouse. A few protesters lingered. Others lit candles along the pavement in silence. Someone, young, angry, poetic, had spray-painted across the wall in bold black letters. "Justice didn't shoot, it simply stood its ground." Back at the California Department of Justice, Rob Bonta faced the press. No arrogance, no theatrics, just calm resolve. "We didn't take him down. We just lifted the truth high enough for everyone to see it." He paused. This wasn't about power, it was about limits. Meanwhile, at a private golf club in Bedminster, Kash Patel stood flanked by 2 American flags. Behind him, a banner that read, "Law and Order, the real version." He stepped up to the mic and snapped, "Judges don't win wars, presidents do." He stared into the lens, chin raised in defiance. But the thunder had faded from his voice. This was a weak decision, a political stunt by a Clinton appointee. It won't last. He took no questions. Clips of the statement played on endless loop across news networks for the next 48 hours. Some spun it as resilience, others as desperation. Then, around 2:00 a.m., a clip surfaced online, posted by a journalist from The Atlantic. It was Stephen Washington, long-retired Supreme Court Justice. He spoke with quiet force. When one judge speaks the truth, he speaks for the silent majority of the Constitution. It was short, haunting. By sunrise, it had gone viral. Think pieces erupted across the country. The New Yorker ran a cover, a courtroom bathed in golden light, a single judge's bench casting a long shadow over a soldier's boots. The Washington Post headlined, "A gavel against the gun." Legal panels bloomed from Berkeley to Yale. Students unpacked Judge Denzel Washington's ruling, not just for its legal force, but for its symbolic defiance. The Constitution is not a suggestion. It is a structure. No rebellion was declared. No insurrection was evident. What was clear was the ambition of one. Those lines, underlined in red, would be quoted for years. While pundits warred over ideology, the public absorbed something quieter. This wasn't just California versus Kash Patel. It was law versus appetite, limits versus momentum, a gavel versus a gut instinct to conquer. And it was the story of an 83-year-old man in a black robe who didn't blink, didn't campaign, didn't grandstand. He wrote it down, and that was enough. Enough to stop the tanks, enough to call the bluff, enough to remind the country, quietly, surgically, constitutionally, what line still mattered. Outside the courthouse, the candles stayed lit through the night, not in mourning, but in memory.